Thanks everybody for attending the webinar today. I'll be taking you through what some of the options are for bank reconciliation in Business One. For some of you, part of this is going to be a review, although I'm hoping that there are a couple of little tidbits that you might be able to take away, that things that you didn't know before. We're also going to talk a little bit about a form of bank statement processing that not everybody uses, and if there's more interest in it, we'll probably drill down. We can drill down in a future webinar. Okay, so we're going to talk about what some of your options are. Most of you are likely using the manual reconciliation in Business One. I would say probably 99.99% of you. There might be some of you out there that are using what the menu item is called reconciliation, and I'll explain the difference between reconciliation, manual reconciliation. And we'll review the manual reconciliation for those of you maybe who haven't done it before or haven't done a lot of it. And then we'll take a look at the other form of reconciliation, and we'll see how it could be actually set up to be done manually, semi-auto or auto, and hopefully give you a few tricks along the way. Okay, so as previously stated, there are three types of reconciliation that are possible in Business One. They're named this way because these are the ways that they appear in the menu items. However, the terms are sort of a little bit gray because in the first category, reconciliation, there's actually a manual way, a semi-auto way, and an automatic way to do this first type. Called reconciliation, and we'll drill down on what I mean by that. The second one, manual reconciliation, this is likely the type that most of you are using. So we'll do a quick review of that, and we'll talk about why it's probably the easiest way to do it, especially if you're starting out. We'll also talk about a third option, which is bank statement processing, which has been a core functionality of Business One since version 9.0. Originally, it was released in some of the European localizations, but it is actually available for North America, for Canada and the US. So we'll take you a bit through what that bank statement processing means, what it is. We're not going to get really detailed on the setup or the process today, but if there is interest in reviewing this, then we'll probably have a second webinar. So certainly at the end of today's webinar, if this tweaks your interest, please fill out the survey and let us know if you'd like to know more. So these three options in Business One, I've kind of put them into other in other words. The first one for reconciliation, this is what I would tend to call the manual-ish entering of your statement into Business One. So this is actually a form of reconciliation where you can enter or import your external bank statement into Business One, compare the two, and reconcile them together. And again, not a lot of people are actually doing this, and I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to do this that actually isn't fully manually. Manual reconciliation, this is what most of you are to do. Really, I call this as the enter only what's missing approach, in the sense of, you activate the manual reconciliation, you say what account you're doing it for, what the ending balance of the statement says and what the ending date of the statement, and then if the two don't match, you're sort of just filling in the blanks to kind of complete the picture in your house bank account and reconcile out. Bank statement processing is actually quite a bit different. So in this particular scenario, there's an automatic import of your bank statement. There's quite a lot more setup that's required for this form of statement work. And the way that this is different between the reconciliation steps and this bank statement way is that you're not actually doing your incoming, outgoing payments and journal entries in your house bank account as you do transactions. You're actually waiting for your bank statement to come in, and then you're using the bank statement to push through and create incoming, outgoing payments and journal entries, if that makes sense. Okay. All right, so we're going to start off by talking about the manual reconciliation first. And here's the one that likely most of you are using. You've got your house bank account. In other words, you've got the account in your general ledger in SAP that is tracking all of your transactions as they occur on any particular bank account. So many of you would have specific GL accounts for certain specific bank accounts, and you'd be tracking the ins and outs on that bank account. Anytime you work with a marketing document in Business One, whether it be an AP invoice or an AR invoice, and then do a corresponding outgoing or incoming payment, of course, that's typically where these transactions are hitting, particularly if you're indicating a certain type of tender like a check or cash. It's likely hitting a cash account type. If it's a credit card type of transaction, it's likely hitting your credit card account. Then, of course, periodically, either through paper or electronic means, your bank is sending you a statement, and you'll want to reconcile those two. Notice at the bottom here, we've got supported localizations. Canada and the US are two of the supported localizations. This information might actually be a little bit old. So again, I don't know that any of you are running localizations outside of Canada or the US, so you might want to just ignore this comment at the bottom. Okay, so we'll take a look at that in our demo system. So if I move over to the demo system, again, hands up if you've never seen this before. Please feel free to ask questions. But most of you, I'm assuming, will have seen this at least once before. We're talking about the banking section, and we're talking about the part of the banking section, the folder here, bank statements and external reconciliations. And you can see that the first two options that we've outlined in our slide so far, they're available here, reconciliation and manual reconciliation. You might ask the question, well, where's bank statement processing? Good question. And when we kind of take a closer look at it, we're going to show you that bank statement processing is something you have to turn on. It's not present in your system by default. It's part of the company settings. And once you turn it on, it's on. Now, once we get into reconciliation, we're also going to show you another menu option that isn't actually revealed by default, and that's the screen where you go to actually input the transactions from your statement. We're going to start off with manual reconciliation, but in a moment I'm going to show you, where that menu item is and why it's hidden. Okay, so for now we're going to start with manual reconciliation. So if I click that menu item, I get, of course, the starter screen for manual reconciliation. We need to pick the bank account and whatnot. If I open up this PDF here that I've just kind of really quickly mocked up, a very simple statement from Royal Bank. So we've got our Royal Bank bank statement in front of us, which states a few very basic things like transaction dates, maybe some details of the transactions, maybe some secondary details, and whether those transactions are debit or credit transactions, and then of course an ending balance. And of course I forgot to put it here, but there'd likely be a statement date at the top somewhere here, and there might even be a bank reference number as well. So considering this statement came in and the ending date would be the 28th of February and the ending balance is 521.89. So if we go back to our screen, we're going to pick the account that it corresponds to, so our Royal Bank checking account. We're going to put 521.89 as the ending balance, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to pick the end date of February. Most of you are likely already doing this. So I click OK, and there you go. And we're going to ignore these two transactions here because this was my test of the system. So pretend you don't see these two transactions here. These two transactions here are the outgoing and the incoming payment. And if I check those two transactions and we ignore that these other two exist, it was really just my initial test, what we would see is that there's a difference of $15. So the transactions in the house bank account and the final balance as we've entered it, there's a slight variance. And if we look at the transactions here on the screen, and we can see the transaction number and a reference. If there's something we're not seeing here in this screen and we want to see if there's expanded form settings, we can actually click the form setting button, and maybe there's extra things that we want to make visible here, like the due dates, etc. We look again at our bank statement and we realize, well, our bank charges, they aren't typically entered into our SAP system because they don't really have to do with a, an AP invoice or an AR invoice, and there's no incoming or outgoing payment. We really just see it when we see our bank statement. So that makes a lot of sense to us. There's typically $15 remaining, and away you go. So if we wanted to then create the journal entry that related to the bank charge, we can click the adjustment button in the lower right-hand corner. We can decide what kind of document we want to create, whether maybe it's an incoming or an outgoing payment that was missed, or a check or a deposit. In this case, we want to create a journal entry, and it already references, of course, the account that we're working with, and we want to find the expense account that's related to bank charges. And in the demo system, it's in the 8000 series here, so we'll just scroll down. And we can see that there's an account here with respect to bank charges, and we would create the correct entry, the correct balancing entry to essentially recognize that bank charge. So if I go ahead and add it to the system, it's added there, it's selected as being part of the reconciliation. You can see the difference is 0. So we're all good. The transactions on the account for the month equal the ending statement on our bank balance. We can go ahead and we can click reconcile. Now, I forgot to actually give the statement here a number, so it kind of warns me. So I'm not going to proceed until I actually give the reconciliation a number. Here's a tip that the consultants will typically say to me when we're coaching people on bank reconciliation, and some of you might have heard this before. A good way to number these is by the date that of the statement that you're reconciling. So I'll just use the 2018-02-28 as the statement number here. So we'll go ahead and click reconcile, and that reconciliation is done. Now, how do I find that reconciliation if I want to, say, print it out and keep a copy of it somewhere? And this was something that didn't always exist on the system, but we have been asked the question before. Sometimes people want to actually print off that reconciliation and kind of keep it in the paper records just in case we need a record of it. So if we go into the banking reports section, we can see that there's a number of banking reports possible, but there's actually also a specific folder for external reconciliations. And we can find reconciliations on the basis of various criteria, like due date, sum, transaction number, etc. But there's this handy report here called the Bank Reconciliation Report. And if we run it, we can pick the bank code. All right, so I'm not sure why my reconciliation or my account code isn't showing up here, but we'll search based on a reconciliation that was previously created for this particular account. And you can see that they followed the convention here that we've recommended, the date of the reconciliation, so 2018, February 19th. So if we go and we select that, we click OK, it actually runs this crystal report, which is a quick report on the bank rec that you did. And this can be printed and filed if you need to be. In this particular case, I reversed this reconciliation, but there you go. Okay, questions so far? As I said, that's pretty straightforward and likely a review of the things that you're already doing to date. So if we take a look back at the next type of reconciliation, which on the system is just called reconciliation. So the idea is we still have our house bank account with the transactions that have occurred in SAP Business One, and we still have an external bank statement. The difference here is that instead of doing the reconciliation manually and only entering in the things that don't occur on the house bank account to make it essentially balance, we're actually going to manually enter or import the entire bank statement and compare it to the transactions. And this particular process can be, the reconciliation can be done manually, it can be done fully automatically or even semi-automatically. And I'm going to show you how this can be accomplished. We're going to preview the manual scenario first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the semi-automatic and the automatic. Again, probably not a lot of you are using this, but we wanted to show you that it's possible. So we're back to the demo system. So again, as I mentioned, in order to use this reconciliation menu item, you actually have to expose another menu item, which does not show up by default. So if we go into the form settings for the main menu item and we drill down into banking and we drill into the bank statements and external reconciliation section, you'll likely see a line item here called process external bank statement, which isn't checked. And for some reason, this is not checked by default in the system. It gave me a little bit of grief initially when I was trying to figure this out. And every time I tried to figure out how to do this again, I had to go back and figure out how to expose that. But that's the trick. You know, we need to see this screen before we can actually work with this reconciliation area. So if we open the process external bank statement screen, what we'll see here is we'll see a form which allows you to manually enter the transactions from your bank statement. So I'm going to select the account that we're working with. We're going to select the Royal Bank checking account as we did before. It's already been reconciled, but I'm going to show you really quickly how we can actually enter the transactions in. So we could go ahead and we could manually enter the transactions in. Okay, we could manually enter the transactions in. However, we could also copy and paste these from an Excel file that was generated from our bank's website. So if I come over to my Excel file here, this Excel file, I actually mocked this up, but this is a rough approximation of what you might get if you decided to export your bank file into CSV format. The way this is formatted isn't exactly the way in which SAP Business One needs it. For instance, the date format doesn't quite match up, and you have to match the column titles sort of the way that they appear in Business One. We can do one of two things. We can either, obviously we will have to format the date data in the way that Business One wants to take it. We can sort of reorganize the spreadsheet so that the columns are the right way. The other option we have is that when in this screen, the process external bank statement, if we right click on here, you notice that form settings is an option, and we can actually reorder the sequence of the way these fields appear on here to help match it to your spreadsheet. So one or the other. I just find that kind of manually editing the spreadsheet works a little better. So this is essentially the date format that Business One needs, and these columns will be known to that form. So if we select the area of the bank statement, all of the transactions for the period, and we copy, we can then paste it into this form. So there you go. That's sort of a quick and dirty way to load your bank statement up onto the system. And I'm going to go back to this screen, and I'm going to use an account, not the Royal Bank account, but one that I've created some transactions before. Okay, and we're going to choose the manual way in this reconciliation menu. And if we click reconcile, what we see on the left-hand side are the transactions from the house bank account, so the transactions from the GL in SAP Business One. And we see on the right-hand side, we actually see transactions that we've entered in this screen, the process external bank statement screen. And if I look at the screen, the process external bank statement screen for that particular account, these are all of the transactions that I've manually entered. I actually picked a savings account that I barely ever use, and these are actually real transactions, okay, coming from the bank. Those transactions are then displayed on this side, and this particular screen allows you to reconcile. So if this line matched this line, we could either double click or we click this down arrow to put it into focus, find the matching line, put it down here. And if this line matches this line, or if one line matches multiple lines or vice versa, We then click the reconciliation button. In this particular case, it says the reconciliation is not balanced, obviously because I have imported a nonsense transaction line that doesn't actually relate to this line. If the two lines matched, this error message wouldn't come up and you'd be able to reconcile those two lines. If the lines aren't balanced and I say okay to creating a balancing transaction, it'll automatically launch the journal entry screen and allow me to balance that transaction. Okay, so this offers a way to reconcile your house bank accounts by importing your bank statements and reconciling the two kind of all online in one screen. Okay, again, not many people are doing this, but we do get the question sometimes, can I actually import my bank statements? The answer is yes. However, the answer also is that easier for you? Does it offer any value above and beyond, say, the manual reconciliation way of reconciling your bank accounts? Some people might say yes. Okay, the last thing that we're going to show you today, or we're going to talk about a little bit, we're not going to dive deeper into showing you, is the concept of bank statement processing. So in bank statement processing, again, this is something that needs to be turned on in SAP Business One. And the way that it is different is incoming and outgoing payments and journal entries that have to do with bank accounts aren't typically done ahead of time when marketing documents or AP or AR transactions are processed. The system is essentially set up so that the bank statement is what creates the incoming, outgoing payments and journal entries, if that makes sense. So bank statement processing is something that has been a core feature of Business One since 9.0, and it requires special setup. It also requires that your bank statements are set up to import automatically, and there is a lot of configuration required to kind of get those files set up. So some of you may be using the electronic file manager to create vendor payment files to submit to your bank. It's actually the same functionality within Business One that handles the outgoing payments. You can also configure to handle reading of electronic bank statements and importing into Business One for the creation of incoming and outgoing payments. So it's less a reconciliation process, more so a payments creation process, if that makes sense, in Business One. So that's why we sort of wanted to present you with this functionality and ask whether or not your company could see themselves using this. It is a little bit different because it's not a reconciliation process per se, but anyone out there who this is sounding familiar to you may have worked with this kind of a process before. So in order to use bank statement processing, it needs to be activated in company details. The activation is irreversible. Once it's activated and once the electronic file manager is set up to automatically import your bank statements in Business One, you're either able to do the process manually or you're able to do it in an automated way. So you can actually set the system up so that any particular bank statement line will automatically create an incoming payment and reconcile it against the incoming or outgoing payment and reconcile it against the appropriate AP or AR invoice. So in this particular system, we don't see bank statement processing, and it's because in the administration module and system initialization, if we go to company details, and we're on the basic initialization tab, you can see that there's this option here, install bank statement processing, and it's blank. Okay, once this box is checked and you've gone ahead and you've configured the system to do this, you can't uncheck it. So we're just going to quickly switch over to another system that we have enabled bank statement processing. So we'll switch over, and the system we're switching to has a different skin, so don't be worried about that. It's just kind of a different, it's the kind of the more modern skinning of Business One for HANA, but this is the same demo environment running on the same server. Okay, so as we log into this demo system, we've got a number of recurring transactions that automatically pop up. Now, in this particular system, because we have in the system initialization company details turned on bank statement processing, and you can see that that option is selected, and it's grayed out now because we can't unselect it. Because that option is turned on, we'll see different options in the bank statement and external reconciliations. And we can see that now it's added a menu item called bank statement processing. There's something called statement evidence. This is actually just a renaming of the import or manually enter your external bank statement screen. And if we open up this bank statement summary, this is the screen whereby you would kind of work with to import your bank statement through the file formats. And there's a button here you can see down here. It's gray. It says import from file. There is some setup required to create these bank statement import formats that match the format of your bank. Unfortunately, in Canada and the US, bank statements aren't a standardized format, so every bank has their own version of this. So there is a little bit of setup required to kind of import the transactions automatically. And the idea is once that these bank statement transactions are imported, they become available on the system. And further to that, we can create the appropriate incoming, outgoing payments or journal entries associated with that statement transaction. So that's about as far as we're going to get into bank statement processing today. Again, we'll be very curious to know if there's anyone out there that wants to learn more about the bank statement processing approach to, I guess, bank account management. And if there is, we would consider doing a future webinar on that. Okay, that's the webinar on bank statement processing for today. We'll stay online a little bit, answer any questions that you might have. Okay, so somebody's asked the question, show me one more time how to import a bank statement in SAP and how to create a journal entry. All right, so we'll go back to our first system. You have to forgive me, I have to switch companies again really quickly. Okay, so in order to import the bank statement, we need to use this menu option, Process External Bank Statement. If you're not seeing this option in the Bank Statements and External Rec menu, make sure you click on the Form Settings button here at the top. It's the piece of paper with the little gear on it, and drill into the banking section and payments. It's it's very likely that this particular option isn't checked because it doesn't seem to be checked in most systems by default. Once you check that, you should be able to see that menu item to process external bank statement. Then choose the bank account you're working with. Okay, and a date range if appropriate, or if necessary. Then you can manually enter the transactions into this screen, or alternatively, you can format the output of the Excel file that you get from your bank in the proper way. And I've figured out that the date format, the date format needs to be month, day, year in order for SAP to take it, and the columns need to match up. So if this is sort of the raw output of the CSV that gets dumped from your bank, you will need to just clean it up a little bit, change the date format, and get it to match the columns that are in Business One. But once we've got the right format, then we should be able to copy that and paste it in here. Now this paste feature wasn't available to me until I picked the bank account that I'm dealing with. When we first open this screen, if we don't pick a bank account, there will be no paste. That's a good thing to heads up. That tripped me up for a while there. But if we click paste now, it should paste the transactions in. And then in theory, this should be the transactions that are unreconciled for that particular bank account. Once the transactions have been reconciled, they go away from this screen, if that makes sense. So if we click update, then those transactions are in the system. Now, once I actually want to run the reconciliation, we click on this reconciliation tab. We select manual, and we pick, of course, the account that we're working with. We can pick the date range as well if it's important. And when we click reconcile, we're going to have the house bank account transactions on this side and the transactions that come from the bank statement on this side. And of course, we've already reconciled these transactions, so they're not showing up here. But if this transaction matched this transaction, we could double click to include it in this screen, double click to include it in this screen. If they both balance, no journal entry is required. It'll just reconcile those transactions together. If they don't balance, it'll say it's not balanced, and it'll ask you if you want to create a balancing transaction. You click OK, and it automatically opens up a journal entry screen so that you can balance the transactions right then and there. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question. All right, the other thing that we should point out is that in this reconciliation window, if we pick an account, there are both automatic and semi-automatic reconciliations. Now, what this will do is it'll allow you to set criteria that will automatically reconcile things from column A to column B. And you can see with the semi-automatic, there's things like amount of the transaction, date, and reference, and you can actually set a deviation on these parameters. So as long as one transaction is within, say, 1 cent of another transaction and other conditions are satisfied, it'll actually automatically reconcile those lines. So this is an interesting feature. If we click on automatic, we can also select, by what criteria are we automatically matching lines. This is an interesting feature, but it's also a dangerous feature because essentially you're allowing the system to automatically reconcile those lines. If you test this and every time you do this, like let's say you've got bank statements that are really, really, really long, you may want to use a semi-automatic or automatic reconciliation between the two. However, in most cases, we would foresee our customers probably wanting to do this manually, where we can match what's on the left-hand side to what's on the right-hand side and reconcile.
Okay, thanks Rob for a great presentation, and thank you to everyone for attending today. While we wait just another minute here for any more questions, I'll just say that when the session ends, you'll see a short survey displayed on your browser window. And if you could take a minute to fill that in and let us know how we did and what you would like to see in future webinars, we'd really appreciate the feedback.